There's a debate about Revelation, a debate that we spent some time learning about on Saturday night as part of our Tikkun Leil Shavuot program, about who experienced Revelation, who did God speak to. The text of the Torah is unclear, and so we're left wondering, on this day, when we are meant to re-experience Revelation, as if we were there and reenact Revelation, what are we meant to experience? The text says that God spoke to Moses. And although all the Israelites, they felt the thunder and lightning and the blast of the horn and the smoke upon Har Sinai, upon Mount Sinai, they turned to Moses and said, "You speak to us. If we hear God's voice, we'll die out of fear, out of angst. So let us hear what you have to say." But tradition says that we were all at Sinai, our ancestors and our descendants, that we all experienced Revelation, and yet it's clear we may have all been at the foot of Sinai, distracted, building a golden calf, but it was only Moshe who had a unique experience of being on top of the mountain, hearing God's voice, carving those stone tablets. And so what are we supposed to do with this fact that we're simultaneously told we were all there, and actually Moses had an experience that was different than everybody else's? I learned from Rabbi Neil Gilman of blessed memory that actually those don't conflict. They complement each other. That while Revelation is meant to be a communal experience, it's also very much meant to be a personal experience. That one's Revelation experience is very different than another's. And so what we read in Torah, as the text clearly states, is Moses' Revelation experience. And so for Moses, he was all in. He went up to Sinai. He got those tablets. He came down. Everybody else had very different Revelation experiences. They may have not responded to the smoke or to the blast or to the thunder and lightning in the same way. Their revelation was quite different. There's the communal and the personal. And we can't assume that as community, when we're experiencing something, that we know what the personal experience is really like. The same is true when we mourn. That the loss of every single loved one is taken differently depending on how and when one leaves this world, depending on the sudden or expected nature of that loss, depending on whether or not we, the mourners, see that they have lived a full and complete life, or they were taken from this world far too soon without being able to experience the life that we wanted them to experience, missing out on so much. And we mourn in community. When somebody sits Shiva, it's so they have a shoulder to lean on and cry on, a person there to pick them up when they don't want to get out of bed, as if we are all surrounding them like we surrounded Sinai. And sometimes we do that. We converge in a living room during a week of Shiva, and we thought or think that we've done our job being there for somebody without realizing that this personal experience of grief and mourning doesn't end. In the same way we ask and expect and hope that Revelation is ongoing, we reenact Revelation because we recommit to this covenant. we make a promise of Tei Nishmato to Rabbi Tzorah Chaim, that our loved one's soul is bound up in our lives and forever in our hearts, in our souls, forever a part of us. And even if we were all at that metaphorical foot of Sinai, even if we were there during Shiva propping our friends and family members up, there's a reason we go for that walk around the block, because we're almost taken aback realizing that the world has gone on and continued while our worlds stopped. In many ways, well, our world ended, because the world that we approach and enter, the completion of Shiva as we go for that walk around the block, is a very different world, a world without someone who we love so much. It's because as hard as we try, and I think Judaism does this better than most faiths, about being there for each other as we mourn, no amount of making a minyan or sending over a tray of ruglach helps us understand the grief that somebody goes through when we mourn loss. If anything, it distracts somebody for a moment, helps us separate from our thoughts. And then we return to our thoughts and feel guilty that we were okay for a second, that we were okay in this reality, and then we remember all that we've lost and all that is missing. And so we have this conflict of communal revelation and personal revelation, and this conflict of communal mourning and personal grief. That as we come together here at this moment in preparation for our Yizkor service, as community, as we come together to be there for each other, even though whomever we mourn and the losses that are still so fresh, whether we lost our loved ones but a few months ago or decades ago, a couple of years that feels like only yesterday. As we come together as community to be there for each other and mourn with each other, we also recognize that one person's loss is so different than the other that we actually don't know what the other is feeling. A bereavement support group comes together, each person's loss and each person's reality is so different. You're there for each other and you feel the same sense of loss, the same gaping hole in your soul. And you're able to be there for each other as a result. But one person's loss, the hole in one person's soul, is completely different than the other because of the circumstances and relationship and significance of that loss. And so we're sort of caught in this catch-22 as community, that we say Yizkor together because we make sure, especially at times of grief and mourning, and when we've lost a loved one, the truth is there's always a period of mourning. We never stop mourning. Some ways we never stop grieving. We just learn how to adapt, keep going and keep living. We come together, and yet we understand that we are all still on our unique individual experiences. We read of Moshe's revelation, and only Moshe's, because that is so different than what each and every Israelite experienced. And so when we mourn, and when we grieve, and when we spend this time ritually remembering, we acknowledge that what we experience now, even as community, doing the exact same thing together, is so different than what the person sitting right next to us is experiencing. The grief that we're feeling is so different than what they are feeling. And the memories that we hold on to are so different than what they hold on to, what they yearn for, or what they wish they would have been able to experience. And yet, even as each of us acknowledge the uniqueness of that grief and the uniqueness of those memories, we still opt to mourn together. We still opt to be in our grief as community, to remember with each other, even if we don't remember what the person next to us is remembering, because it's together that it's just a little bit more bearable to live in this world without those that we love. To be together, we continue to have shoulders to cry on, people to lift us up in those mornings when it's difficult to get out of bed. Even if their experience is different than our own, we remember together, for at those times when we feel most alone, to be reminded that we aren't. May those that we remember this morning, may their memories always be for a blessing. Amen.